Begin today by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we gather today. Pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. And I extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are with us today. So the event today is the first 6 months as a CEO. So I'll provide you a little bit of context. The topics that we're going to be covering today, we've got an excellent panel of 4 CEOs who are going to be sharing their insights and their experience with all of the audience today. And the key topics we're going to cover are, in that first 6 months as a CEO, working with the board on the leadership mandate. So setting the leadership mandate with the board, how do I actually negotiate that and how do I set that up? Then assessing the leadership team. In most cases, we inherit a leadership team. So how do we assess that leadership team and then determine where we want to initiate change where it's needed? Once we're at that stage, we then start to think about setting the strategy and the culture for the organisation. And in many cases, with a new CEO, we recognise that there's a reset that's required. And then the final topic we're going to cover today is building the operating cadence and execution discipline in the leadership teams. So a little bit of context for us. Lighthouse, we're a leadership consulting firm. And we accelerate transformation through leadership. Typically, we see leadership investment as quite tactical. There's a bit of coaching here, there's a workshop there, there's some leadership work somewhere in the cadence of the business. And we're of the belief that there is a better way. And we've been working with our international partners to look at ways in which we can systemise leadership. By systemising leadership, we're talking about a common model that can have a range of different applications in capability and leadership development. It gives us an opportunity to be able to build a common language, gives us an opportunity to be able to leverage the different investments we make. And most of all, it gives us an opportunity to be able to integrate our leadership, accelerate our message and our transformation through that. So today, we've set this topic because those resets in relation to systemising leadership are typically going to start in the first 6 months with the new CEO. So what we want to do today is unpack the experiences of each of our panel members and be able to determine how we can work and learn from these excellent CEOs. So just passing over to our panel, got our 4 panel members. We've got David Murray. David's the CEO of BuildExact. I'll let David explain his business, as I will with the other CEOs. We also have Sunitha Alexander from Smarter Communities, Damien Woods from Benestar, and Sean Ford from Dunlop Flooring. So you'll be hearing from each of our panel members during the course of the morning, course of the afternoon, I apologise. What we'd encourage you to do too is if you've got any questions that emerge for the panel, just pop them into the chat. What we're going to do is just have the conversation with the panel first, and then we'll circle back if there's an opportunity to either do questions live or alternatively address the questions that are in the chat. What we will do too, though, is we'll circulate all of the questions and the panel's responses after the event. We'll also have the opportunity to be able to circulate a recording of the event if anyone on the event today wants to get a copy or share that with other people within their communities. So I'm just going to pass over now to each of our panel members and just ask them to introduce themselves and also just share a little bit about their business. I'll kick off with you, David.
Sure. Thanks, Mark. Hi, David Murray, everyone. I sound a bit croaky like you, Mark, but I've got an excuse. Actually, I'm fighting a lurgy. So excuse me if I cough and splutter a bit. So I've been at BuildExact for a little over 5 years. Took it over when it had 5 people, and we're now approaching, well, we're in the 80s. We did get a bit bigger than that, but we took a bit of action based on what's happening in the market to refine the efficiency of the business. Very simply, what BuildExact does is we've got a software platform that helps residential custom home builders and remodelers simplify the construction process. So if anybody's done a renovation, a custom home build, then they know that that project can be quite painful. It's typically a very manual orientated process. So we built a software platform where the builder can engage with the homeowner from the first interaction all the way through to final invoice. And so it really digitizes the whole workflow that the builder has with the homeowner, the supplier, and his subcontractors. We're currently in 5 markets that we're targeting. That's why I'm here in the US. It's a big growth market for us. And we work with, typical builder is a husband and wife team. So it's been very refreshing for me joining Build Exact, having worked on many large corporates where it's very much a technical sell, procurement, CIOs, etc. We don't have that with our builder. It's very much a builder who's coming to a demo, and the wife's there typically with them, and you can ask the partner, what are you looking to get out of this demo today? And the response is, I want to get my husband back. So it's really personally satisfying when you hear that sort of visceral emotional response of what Build Exact's doing for the customers.
Thanks, David. Well done. Just pass now to Sunitha Alexander, if you'd like to do a quick introduction, Sunitha.
Sure. Thanks, Mark. Hi, Sunitha Alexander. I'm the CEO of Smarter Communities. And what we do is we are in strata. So we're Australia's second largest strata company. And put quite simply, a strata company is needed when there are multiple owners on one asset or one building. So we look after residential buildings, we look after commercial buildings, retail centres, as well as industrial parks. And our job, quite simply, is just to make sure that all the efforts of the owners, the multiple owners, are coordinated so that there's sort of a harmonious community of owners at any of those assets.
Terrific, Sunitha. Thank you very much. I might hand across now to Damien Woods, if you'd like to introduce yourself and your business, Damien.
Good afternoon, everyone. Damien Woods. I'm the CEO of Benestar Group. Benestar Group is the largest provider of employee assistance and wellbeing services to corporates across Australia and New Zealand. And more than likely, I might be a provider of services to a whole bunch of people on this call. But in simple terms, we provide psychological support to employees in the short term, either for ongoing workplace or relationship or home-based issues that they may have, as well as providing psychological support for workplace trauma or critical incidents, and other things like doing assessments that are psych-based for enterprises, either through management development programs or through programs of change or any particular skills that might have a psych component to workplace execution. So we've been around for about 30 years. We're the largest player in the market. And I joined Benestar about 3.5 years ago at a particular point of transition. So that'll be an important part of our conversation. Thank you.
Thanks, Damien. And finally, I'll just hand across to Sean Ford, if you'd like to provide an introduction, Sean.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Hi, everyone. I'm Sean. I'm from Dunlop Flooring. We are Australia's largest manufacturer of carpet underlays, and we are an importer and distributor of flooring, a big range of flooring products. So we're a national business. The business itself is part of a larger global organisation. We operate in Europe, UK, America, and there's 3 businesses here in Australia. So I run the flooring business, and a couple of other carpet businesses as well. So we're building materials. We're closely linked to the construction industry, have dealings with strata companies as well. So there's a bit of connection here already on the call. My business has 76 people, all based here in Australia, and a real blend of experience within the business. But great business to lead and a great culture, which we're really proud of.
Thanks, Sean, and great to have the panel come together, and we look forward to sharing your experiences and insights. We're going to kick off with now is creating the board leadership relationship and the leadership mandate. So I'm just going to ask David if he'd like to share some of his experiences on that topic, and Damien's going to join him as well. So perhaps you might be kind enough to kick off on the board leadership mandate, David. Just got you on mute.
Yeah, that old thing that happens all the time. You're on mute. So when I joined Build Exact, just to put some context, it was founder-led, and so the board was a very informal structure. And so there was 5 people in the company, very family-orientated culture, and so the role of the board was usually at that stage more about a guiding role. As we grew the company, the need of a proper board governance clearly became apparent, and we put one in place that we were fortunate enough to attract some very high profile people in the industry onto our board. And so we went from this very informal board structure where certain things were minuted, but it was really unstructured, to this very, very structured board. And a couple of our board members, you may know Lee Jasper and George Savides, on some of Australia's largest companies. And so my role with the board immediately changed. And one of the things that became apparent to me, and well, after finding I was butting heads a little bit with the board, because I was in a position previously which was more of a conversational, hey, here's what we're doing, to now it is a more structured board reporting. It took a little bit of maturity for me to work through, actually, they're not challenging me in what I'm doing here as a CEO. They're wanting to understand, to be able to leverage their experience and give me some guidance. And something that helped me adapt to that was shifting the way I thought about the board, from being I'm sort of reporting to the board to actually the board is my primary team. That's the team I need to work with on the things that are important, most of all for the company. Yes, there's execution things that happen in the day-to-day that the executive team work on. The things that are important for the board around, whether it's governance, obviously cash position of the company, are you making your targets, exposures, etc. I shifted it from being a challenge, am I doing this stuff right, to we're collectively looking at these things. And that changed the whole dynamic between myself and the board. The second thing that I did that I wish I'd done sooner on in that process was we actually had an open discussion about the way of working as a board. And there were times when someone like one example was someone said, oh, it's like you're heading towards a wall in a car and you put your foot on the accelerator and you're going to have a massive crash. It's like, well, I know I've got a challenge, guys. I don't need to be told that, right? That's not constructive. Give me something that's constructive that I can work with, right? So some shifts in having a transparent conversation about how we work together, what was a way to engage in a constructive manner was actually really beneficial to everybody involved. Then just last point I've got on the role of the leadership team with the board. I do give exposure 100% with my leadership to the board, and without being shy or defensive or protective of letting the board have a direct interface with one of my executives. I find transparency, if you've got a board that's not looking to find fault, actually goes a long way to getting you the support that you need, right? They generally then have a deeper understanding of the world that you're living. And like I got an email from one of my board members here in Austin just today, going, man, it's hard being on top of the business. Just have one fire that you put out and then there's another fire. So actually, support you more. So there are a couple of key learnings that I had as I started working with a more formal structured board.
That's excellent, David. Thanks for sharing those insights. Damien, anything you'd like to add on the topic of the board leadership mandate?
Yeah, I mean, firstly, David, thanks. I found that a great story and got my own insights out of that as well. Look, I want to start by saying, and I'm reflecting on my experience here as a CEO at Benestar, but also my experience on being on boards and interacting with CEOs and exec teams, as well as in a previous life counselling boards and executive teams. So I'm trying to bring all of those experiences to date. And the reflection I would make is that my experience says that each board and leadership team context is going to be different. So you all have similar but different experiences. That's natural and it's normal. So I found the very important things to do in front up is obviously you've got to start making that connection. That's generally going to happen maybe during the interview process or through a succession planning process where you're getting closer to that role. But you need to establish the relationships, pretty early on, particularly with the chair, but with the entire board, because sometimes you're going to get boards that are functional. Sometimes you might get boards that are dysfunctional. You might get boards that are very aligned with each other, and others that aren't so much. So understanding the context in which you're operating quite quickly for me as both a board member and a CEO is a fundamentally important thing. Establishing that trusted relationship, particularly with the chair, and I really would echo David's comments there about, you know, the chair and the board as a support for you. That's part of their job, right? Now you will get, you know, it's also their job to do that bit of that judging and those sorts of things, but you know, they're there with expertise and experience and a separation from that day to day that might give you clarity and support and guidance. So don't be afraid to, you know, don't think as a new CEO you've got to carry the weight of the world on your shoulders and you don't have an opportunity to engage and seek support. But I'd establish the trusted relationships early. I try and assess, you know, what's the nature of that board? Is it connected? Is it aligned? You know, in my case, I've got a very interesting board construct. So I'm owned by a parent company in Australia, and that parent company in Australia is owned by a company in Zurich. Now, my board has a combination of my local stakeholders and my overseas stakeholders through that chain of ownership. And they're all connected, but you know, their priorities sometimes are similar and sometimes they're different. And so understanding each of the objectives of the board members through that respective interest of shareholders is an important thing, and getting that to an understanding of how that works such that I can get in either them in alignment. It's part of my job, and it's certainly the chair's job to do that, but overall I'm doing that and making sure that I and my execution and the strategy plan are also in alignment with those. So I would counsel very much sort of setting those things in place, you know, very, very early on. And in terms of that trusted relationship question, you know, it'll come through part of the execution thing, but, you know, in those first days and months and weeks, you know, you're all unknown entities to each other to a certain extent. That's the normal case. So you really have to start building through execution, you know, trust that you're a safe pair of hands, right? That you've got a plan, that you're in control, that you're making progress, that you're forward signaling, that you've got a handle on the risks, and you've got a plan to manage them. So depending on your previous experience, you know, a lot of stuff does stop. The buck does stop with you as a CEO. At different stages of your career, you have an opportunity to escalate to someone up the food chain to help you take care of something. It changes a bit when you get to CEO. So the board will, in my experience, will expect that if there's a challenge, firstly, you're going to let them know that there's a challenge, or if there's an opportunity, you let them know that. But you've also got to let them know, here's your plan to address it. And if you're just escalating stuff for their information and just support without your leading point of view or plan, well, then your board might start to look at you and go, well, have I got the right CEO? So there's a difference as you start to, in my view, as you start to progress through your career and you get into that very senior leadership spot. But you've got to have that plan. You've got to be in control. You've got to be making progress. You've got to be forward signaling. And through that style of relationship and that forward expression and the no surprises, that's where, and the delivery on the strategy and outcomes over time, that's where you start to cement and confirm that trusted relationship status. So in addition to the other things that David said, I think they may be worthy of consideration.
Well done, Damien, and thank you, David. Some of the key points that I picked up there just from the both of you, the maturing as the board matures and building that relationship and having that self-awareness. David made an excellent point about the primary team and being a part of the primary team, so that the relationship that exists between the leadership team and the board is very symbiotic and very supportive. Exposing the leadership team to the board so that it doesn't all have to go back through the CEO, and also building those board relationships in the operating context. And Damien made an excellent point too about who are the stakeholders of the board, because there may also be a multiple level of stakeholders that we're looking to try and realise. And then finally, that two-way trust established through, one, having a plan and some guidance from the board, but then also providing trust through the disciplined execution of being able to deliver on what the expectations are the board have. Thanks very much. It's an excellent kickoff. Just going to pass now to Sunitha and Sean. The topic we want to cover here is assessing the leadership team and initiating change where needed. So as I mentioned in the introduction, we often inherit a leadership team, and one of the key success factors for a CEO is having the right people around them on that leadership team. So I'll hand over to Sunitha and Sean to share their experiences. Thanks, Sunitha.
Sure. Thanks, Mark. Look, I think with every CEO appointment, it's an opportunity to sort of reassess where you are in the company journey. And I think a CEO change sort of signifies an evolution of the last phase to the next phase, if you like. So what that meant for the board at Smarter Communities was to accelerate growth. Before I was appointed CEO, I was the head of growth for Smarter Communities. And we were able to grow the company organically for the first time in 10 years. So in the board's mind, the evolution of that was to accelerate the growth that we experienced previously. So, how I approached that was to really go macro, micro. First and foremost, to echo David and Damien, it was to get clarity and alignment with the board members around exactly what their growth ambitions really meant, around, what does that really mean when it comes to customers and revenue and profit. So once that clarity and alignment, once we had that clarity and alignment, it was about really strategy, structure, and skills. And for me, it was sort of really thinking through the strategic drivers that would lead to the growth ambitions that the board has, and just bringing a laser sharp focus onto those strategic drivers. Then it was about thinking through the structure, right? So if we've got the strategy in place to get the growth that we want, how do we need to restructure our company as well as our leadership team to be able to deliver on those strategic goals. And then finally, it was a skill set. So, once the structure was set of how we needed to structure ourselves, do we have the right people in the right seats on this bus, so to speak? So, for me, it was, and again, the leadership team, the former executive leadership team, it's not that, they had the wrong skills. It was just different to what we needed at the point in the journey that we're in. And I think they all did an incredible job getting us to the point that we were at that point. But going forward, it was about leaders with a greater growth mindset, if you like. And upon reflection, I think some of the things that worked for us when we made the changes that we did was, number one, absolutely clarity and alignment with the board. And the second thing for me was, using my first 90 days, there was a lot of thinking time, which is not something that many of us get to do, where you just get to sit and think about what you want to do. We're so caught up in the day-to-day, but really that thinking time was invaluable. And a quote comes to mind, I don't know who said it, but it's, give me 6 hours to cut down a tree and I'll spend the first 4 sharpening the axe. So that was, a lot of my first 90 days, I wouldn't even say it was 90, the first 30 days was just that thinking time. And once we decided what needed to be done, one thing that was really important for me is once the decision was made, that we acted swiftly and that we made the changes all at once. So, we ended up switching 4 out of the 6 ELT members. So we've got 4 new executive leadership team members. And the changes I wanted to happen all at once, because I didn't want, one person and then 3 months later somebody else and 2 weeks later somebody else. I think it would have caused too much uncertainty within the business. So it happened quickly and it happened all at once. And, that way it enabled our business to focus on what was most important, that's looking after our clients. So.
That's excellent, Sunitha. Thanks very much for sharing that with us. Sean, over to you.
Thanks, Mark. I suppose in the context of the conversation today around my first 6 months as CEO, I've thought about it as through my own experience, which is you become the CEO because you're very good at your craft. And my craft or my experience was sales and marketing. So I've developed within that sort of silo or that function, and then you get put into a CEO role, and all of a sudden you're responsible for finance and operations and quality and all these other areas that you really have no experience in, so to speak, because you've worked your craft throughout your career. So my first key learning was to know what you don't know, and to understand the areas that you have good experience and understanding of, and the areas that you need to build your capability and build your understanding. And that takes time, and it's not something that you want to rush. But I always look at it with the view of value, and and I talk to my team about this all the time. Where does the value lie? How do we maximize value? And then if you apply that to your different functions or your different leads in your leadership team, you know, what value do they deliver? Are they maximizing it? Is there a gap between where the value is at the moment and where you think it should be? And that takes a bit of time to understand that. But if you constantly focus on where the value lies and are we maximizing it, you quickly start to understand how the leadership team is performing and how they're delivering upon that. As I said, give it time. The difficult part, I suppose, is having the difficult conversations with the team and challenging and coaching them and getting them up to the standard that you need to deliver your overall business objectives. But the other thing that I would say, Mark, is the value of a trusted advisor. And I've worked with Mark Emerson now for a long time, back in my days in sales and marketing. But having someone that you can have an open and honest and trusting conversation with, somebody who will tell you the truth. They say when you become CEO, all of a sudden your jokes are funny and everybody laughs at what you have to say. Sometimes it's good to have somebody tell you the jokes aren't that funny and maybe what you're doing is not right. And the first 6 months is really important. So you can have a trusted advisor, somebody that can give you that honest feedback. I just encourage those people to try and find those people in their network, and those trusted advisors may be in your leadership team themselves. Typically, finance directors can give you pretty honest advice as well and feedback. But if you can work your network and find somebody who can give you that support, I think that's invaluable also.
Thanks, Sean. Much appreciated sharing your insights. And a couple of things I just took out from both Sunitha and Sean, just to summarise the change that Sunitha referred to about accelerating growth and then having real clarity around what the board mandate was, and then upskilling her team around growth mindset so that the skill investment is matching what the strategy is about, and also separating the macro and the micro requirements. It's almost like, you know, having a bifocal lens where you've got to be looking at what's happening short term in the micro sense, but also keeping an eye on the big picture. Structure follows strategy, and it sounds like the changes both from the skill perspective and also the team dynamic was managed quickly. Very impressive hearing that you made the changes and you accelerated those so that you didn't have this sort of ongoing issue. You really went in, made the changes quickly, and then moved on with the direction that you were looking to lead as the CEO. Also loved the 90 days where you stepped back and took the time. There's a real temptation to rush in and, you know, be seen to being a person of action. And it takes a lot of personal discipline sometimes to be able to step back and give yourself the opportunity to be able to create the thought leadership. Sean, love the conversation around the skills that you have and also how you build those complementary skills around your leadership team. Where's the value and where can we deliver value as a team and as an organisation? That's a great insight. And yeah, the concept of a trusted advisor, whether that exists within the board or sometimes it's pretty lonely being a CEO at times. So having the opportunity to be able to have someone that you can actually share that journey with is a real asset. So really appreciate you sharing those insights. Just to anyone who's on the call, if you feel the need to provide a question, feel free to drop it in the chat if you want to. But as I said, we'll try and actually have some time available for you to offer some live questions as we get to the end of the event. I'm going to head back now to David, talk about setting the strategy and culture for the organisation. I mean, a change of CEO means that, you know, instantly there's a significant impact on culture. Many would argue that the culture comes right at the top of the organisation. So that allows the opportunity to be able to build culture. And also referring to Sunitha's experience, the board will typically have a different mandate, which is part of the catalyst to make the change of CEO in the first place. So David, if you can share some of your insights and also Sunitha around setting the strategy and culture for the organisation.
All right, thanks, Mark. Enjoying the conversation. So for me, the first 6 months as CEO, I think pivotal in the success of you as a CEO on a number of fronts. And I think that the number 1 and 2, and I think they're equal, are the strategy and the culture, the tone that you set from the outset as the leader of the business. I mentioned before that I took over a family-orientated business. So people were paid bonuses, but they actually just got paid bonuses on the basis whether the founder thought they did a good job, right? So there was, no real set of clear goals and accountabilities that existed. So it was a culture that was very close-knit, and I'd come from a big corporate where lots of accountability, data-driven, process-led, and was a little bit surprised about some of what I did take over with Buildxact. So I didn't change that to start with because it would have broken the team, right? So now that could be a team of 1,000 people, could be a team of 5 people. You need to read, is the culture got some fragility to it? There's a bit of healing that you've got to do. I took over another company, which I did work with Mark on, where the culture was toxic. People were openly racist in the business. And so with that environment, I had to make a very clear stand that was no longer going to be accepted in the business. You'd be dismissed if I heard that again. Taking that approach with Buildxact would have been a complete failure. I would have lost everybody. And so over the course of not just the 6 months, but as we've grown bigger and bigger and the company's needing to have more accountabilities and more discipline around your processes, then I bring a stronger, more accountable leadership style to the team without turning into a psychopath or anything. And I just want the main comment I want to leave you with here about strategy and culture is I think they're very entwined, right? You can have a fantastic strategy, and if that strategy can't be executed, then you're going to lead to failure, and people aren't going to want to be there. But for me, the strategy actually needs to be very tied to the purpose. If people can't believe that the strategy that you're working with aligns to the purpose of the company, then people aren't going to engage in the company. So you're going to have a culture where people are showing up to get their paycheck, not teaming, not collaborating. And for me, setting whether you call it your North Star, ground everybody on what that purpose is. And then, okay, here's our strategy to go and execute or to go and achieve that purpose. Then people buy into it. I guess the final point I'd make is you don't have all the answers as a CEO. Sometimes people, that may shock you. I say that to people, I don't have the answers. I don't. So having an open environment where people are bought in on the strategy, they're bought in on the purpose, then you get insight, you get perspective from the team that helps you be successful. So to do that, you obviously need a very safe environment. And, I've used Lighthouse 3 or 4 times through my career to facilitate that. So it's not me, in the room all the time, because you're allowed personality. Doesn't matter whether you speak very softly or not, just because you've got the title CEO, you're a loud voice in the room. And so using an independent party to actually help you, align people, get them talking, get them sharing, so then you actually get greater insight about what's happening in the company, I think is very, very important.
Thanks, David. Just hand over to Sunitha to share her thoughts.
Sure, thanks, Mike. So I think, the culture at Smarter Communities, it's a family-owned business, and it is very much about people, and it's very tight-knit. And historically, the culture has been to prioritise our people strategy. And not that there's anything wrong with that, but I think, there needs to be a balance between people and profit. I don't think it's profit over people, but I also actually don't think it's people over profit either. And I think it's about sort of, given the growth ambitions that we have, it's about striking that balance between the two. And, sometimes, just going across our business in the first couple of years, it was, profit was almost looked at as a dirty word. We don't want to just be making money, and for anyone that listens to Simon Sinek, I think he says this best, you don't buy a car just to put petrol in it. But without petrol, your car's not going anywhere, just like you would never run a company just to make money. But if you're not making money, your company's not going anywhere. So I think at the moment, you know, with our growth ambitions and the strategic drivers that need to get us there, we have to lift the performance of our company. There's no doubt about it. And I think when you're trying to change, it's not really changing, it's evolving. It's evolving our culture. It's not to say that we don't have pockets of excellence across our business. It's about how do we take those pockets of excellence and replicate that across our business. So when you're trying to sort of affect that kind of change, it's critical that all of our leadership group is aligned in that way forward, right? And when I was first appointed CEO, one of the first people that came to mind was actually Peter Nankervis from Lighthouse. I've worked with Peter before, and what I really, really loved about the way that Peter does what he does is he gives you the framework and tools that are just simple and easy to grasp and implement. And when I was speaking to Peter and trying to sort of get across what I was trying to accomplish, he went away, thought about it, came back and said, I've got it, we'll use the compass. And I was like, okay, well, tell me more. And the compass framework is what we're using at the moment, actually, to get that alignment around strategy and culture with our leadership group. And just really briefly, and Peter can probably would do a much better job explaining the compass, but I'll give it my best shot. So North is really your North Star, your purpose, some of the things that David just mentioned. It's the vision, it's the direction, it's the strategy, it's the North Star of where we want to be and where we want to go as a company. Then if you go east, think of Eastern philosophies, behaviors, culture, values. To get to our north, how do we need to show up as a leadership group? What does that mean for us? Then you head south, and these are things that'll try and hold you back, right? It's the things that'll keep pulling you back, and it's to make sure that we're aware of it, but also having strategies to move out of the south. And then if you go to the west, it's think of the Western world: structure, process, execution, getting things done. So having this compass, and really, we brought all of our leaders. Our company is about we've got 40 odd key leaders across Australia. And we brought we got together as a leadership team for 3 days, and we worked on this compass together. So I think, when you're trying to affect that kind of change, there needs to be ownership from all levels of leadership, not just the CEO, not just the executive team, but everybody. So we did a lot of work around our compass, and what it gave us was sort of one language and one tool, one thing that we could all gravitate towards and use as our guiding star, if you like. What we got after those 3 days together, every single leader, without exception, said that they'd never felt more aligned, engaged, or inspired as a leadership team after the 3 days together. So what this now means for us is we've got a guiding compass for the next phase of our journey. Not only at the leadership team, one of the things that we talked about was that what we did together as a leadership group couldn't stay in that room. We had to take it and cascade it to the 250, 300 odd people across our business. So that's the phase that we're in at the moment, just cascading those messages and the work that we did across the business so that we are all aligned around our strategy and culture.
Thanks, Sunitha, and thanks, David. A couple of points there that resonated with me is just that need for situation. It sounded like you both went from corporate into a family business, and then the dynamics changed dramatically, and having the self-awareness to work out how to make that sort of transition. Love David's comments about non-negotiable values and behaviours in relation to his previous role. We need to set those, make them clear for everyone to understand them, and then uphold them as a fundamental. The link between strategy and purpose, having a vision, having a direction, having a common goal which everyone can buy into. David made the comment of the safe environment, and quite often our experience is that we'll see CEOs running workshops, but we would argue that the value is really being able to take that step back, as Sunitha referred to when she first went into her new role, because if you can listen and not be that loudest voice in the room, as David referred to, it gives you a great opportunity to really be able to reflect upon what you're actually seeing in relation to your team. And loved Sunitha's comments, aligned, engaged, inspired team. across the organisation. I think that's something that we all value and we all work towards, and it's great to see that that's an outcome that's emerging from the work that you've been doing in conjunction with your team, Sunitha. Okay, the last topic, building the operating cadence and execution discipline in the leadership team and the business. So coming back right at the start, I think Damien made the point that you build trust by being able to execute in a disciplined way. So that's what delivers the outcomes the board's looking for. So I'll just move across to Sean and Damien. Perhaps, Sean, you might want to kick us off and just share your insights on that topic.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Mike. I suppose as the CEO, you inherit a business, or you've got a business to run, and your role is to maximise. Again, I go back to the value, maximise the value of the assets and the resources that you've been given as a leader of the business, but importantly, the time as well. And time's critical as far as the cadence, the operating cadence, the operating rhythm of a business. So you'll inherit the rhythm of a business, and there's a lot of businesses that do things because they've always done things. And just try and understand whether that's a wasteful activity, whether everybody has meetings, or whether everybody does certain things because they feel comfortable and because it's habitual and they've always done it, or again, whether there's actually value that you can extract from that. So you'll start to understand again, what is wasteful activity, where the value lies, and how again you can maximise the use of your assets, resource, people, and importantly time, because as CEOs, you only have the same number of hours in a day that everybody else has. And we've got a life outside of work, so finding the best use of time is obviously critical. Discipline's a really important part of our business. We have a really strong culture of accountability in our team, in our organisation. We have a set of values, and one of our values is discipline, and that again is ensuring that people are accountable. We talk about delivering what you promised, and if anyone from my business is on this call, there'll be no surprise to hear that. We talk about all the time, whether it's internally or externally. You make a promise internally, you deliver it. Externally, you deliver it. Whether it's your customer, you deliver what you promise because of that culture of accountability and discipline. And also, my final point, I suppose, is you've got to walk the walk as a CEO. You can't just talk about discipline and accountability. You've got to actually deliver it, because people watch what you do as the head. And I said before that people sort of laugh at your jokes and all of a sudden you're funnier than what you are, but people are watching what you do and they watch your behaviour and they watch how you act as a leader. So you need to be disciplined, you need to hold yourself to account, and you need to make sure that you are maximising the best use of your time as well.
Thanks, Sean. That's excellent. Anything that you'd like to add, Damien, your experiences?
Yeah, and again, just reflect. I really appreciate Sean's comments. They really resonate with me. Look, just to add an additional or slightly different spin, I suppose, given my context, when I joined Benestar, so we've been around for 30 years, and my sense is we've been doing the same thing for about 30 years. And I think we'd sort of fallen into a comfortable cadence about how to do some stuff, but the market was changing, need was changing, and I think we're asleep to that. So those earlier conversations had about resetting and understanding strategy. I think that we've talked about earlier. I won't go over them, but that don't dismiss them. They're absolutely fundamental to really good execution. If people don't believe the strategy, don't understand the strategy, or we haven't done enough work around getting them engaged in it, then my view is no amount of work around cadence is really going to get you there. So until people understand and believe and commit to the mission that you're on, and they do that collectively in a consistent way, that cadence of execution is fundamentally challenged. So, and just a word about Christian, I joined an enterprise and they're always using this term shared vision. In my experience, most shared visions are a vision shared by someone for someone else. It's not shared in that we have a common belief around it. So it'll be worth sort of understanding in your own context, is that vision a shared vision, as in it's shared by someone and you must adopt it because I said, or do people really believe in it? And that's a fundamental thing, particularly with your leadership team. So what I'd also say is execution, that cadence is really understanding the skill and capability of your team. Are they similar? Are they different? And particularly not just as individuals, but how they approach group-based problem solving. How do they work together to solve problems? One of the challenges I found when I first joined is, previous CEOs to me were very command and control. lots of blame culture, those sorts of things. And so I had an executive team that was actually pretty good, but they were afraid to execute. And so consequently, what we'd have is, people that would sort of escalate everything up to the CEO to make decisions. And, Sunita, that's where the thinking time goes away and you get stuck in the weeds. So part of my job was to re-empower and reset the boundaries for decision-making and accountability back to the executive team as individuals and as a collective unit. So I couldn't really get on that cadence for improvement until that was reset. And it surprised me how long it took for some individuals to accept their accountability and that they could make decisions and they were free. But my view as a CEO, my job is to support and empower my team and teams to be able to do their job, not to do their job for them. Right? And so I have to bring them both up as both individuals and as a group. So some of my first activities really were fundamental around that, resetting the strategy, getting them to contribute and buy in it and own and believe that in the same way, talk about it in the same way and understand its implications for execution in the same way. And then to get them to work in a consistent way. We used to have 1 million meetings that had no value. Lots of people, no agenda, no purpose, no outcome, way too many people that would meet, and then we'd realise that we'd have to meet again and we'd have to kick it down the road. So it might sound like a silly thing, but getting focused and disciplined around the basics of execution, about assigning accountability, about driving accountability down to the coalface. So whether you like it or not, the higher up you go into an organisation, the less you really understand about what happens at the coalface. So finding a way to stay connected to what's really happening, particularly in those frontline interactions with customers, is fundamentally important. So driving accountability down and then visibility from the coalface back up through an execution, not just of your leadership team, but with them to their teams and their teams, depending on the scale of your structure, I found also to be pretty fundamentally important. So some of this stuff is really about that vision and culture and alignment and group-based problem solving and skill development. But some of it is the very, very boring stuff of having good governance, regular meetings, contribution outcomes and accountability for performance in those ways.
Thanks, Damien, and thanks, Sean. A couple of the insights there, outstanding. We do a lot of work with CEOs across the business landscape, and we would say the number one behaviour that they'd look for from their team above all would be accountability. That's the one that's the real challenge in terms of being able to deliver those outcomes that we're looking to commit to the board. Sean talked about the leadership shadow, just that ability to be able to lead by example. Very, very crucial because everyone is watching 24/7. I think it's one of those things where you just always seem to be able to need to lead that example and create that sense of way to be able to motivate everyone to be able to follow the leadership that you've actually provided. Not being able to be afraid, be able to, we do a lot of work around decentralised decision making as well, and that can only happen if you can decentralise your decision making. It's sort of the alternative to what Damien said in his experience with Benestar, where everyone was working up to the CEO and all of the emails would have been copying everyone in to make sure that everyone was covered in case anything went wrong. I think we've all been in that environment. So the ability to be able to create decentralised decision making can only come with the fundamentals of discipline around execution and accountability. But if you are in a position where you can actually decentralise your decision making, you can then start to accelerate the cadence of the business, get more done, reduce that centralisation and be able to build out the direction. And the last thing I'll comment on just before we switch to questions comes back to what Sunita said, and David and Sean and Damien. Between you, you've sort of provided that combination of having that North Star of purpose and then using that to motivate your execution and to be able to bring everyone's belief together. And then on the other side, having those values and behaviours or having that culture that's going to actually encourage everyone to really want to drive on behalf of the company. And that last word is the courage to be able to identify. David said, I haven't got all the answers. So being able to create an environment where people can speak up and people can share their view and people can offer their feedback in an environment that they feel motivated to do and also safe to do, is fundamental. So really appreciate everything that you shared with the group today. And I'll now just hand over to anyone. We'll start with some live questions. If anyone's got a question they'd like to share with the panel, here's an ideal opportunity for you to be able to step in. We've seen some questions on the chat. If we need to move to those, we will. Otherwise, we'll respond to those after the event. Has anyone got any questions for the panel that they'd like to ask?
I'll ask a question. Hi, everyone.
Thanks, Susie.
I would love some guidance for any of you that have been put in a position where you've become a CEO in a business where it was founder-led and that founder is still in the business, because obviously there's some political and credibility pieces around that. So I'm looking for some insight or advice on that, please.
The job previous to this, I had the same thing, and Susie, it was a nightmare. So I can imagine the world you're living is pretty challenging. I guess it's hard to answer completely with only having a very small context of the dynamic that you've got there. I've been very fortunate with Buildings That where the founders just let go. I'm sure you've probably tried clear R&R, roles and responsibilities, what you're accountable for, they're accountable for. As I'm reflecting on the previous startup, the thing that probably made it as bearable as possible was getting the team working to me, like getting them to recognize, hey, I need to come to you, versus the founder going around, and I'm sure that's happening, right? He's known them for a while. He's going around and talking to them and saying, don't do that. Well, that'll happen. Well, you need to have that back channel or safe environment that they can then come to you and say, hey, the founders given this sort of instruction as well. It's a tough one. I don't envy you at all.
Thank you.
Thanks, David. Any other questions that anyone would like to offer the panel?
I've got so many more if no one else does, but I'll wait a minute.
Great opportunity, and we've got about 7 minutes, so now's the time if you want to actually ask a question. Robert?
Yeah, hi, thank you. Rob Kincaid here. I just love perspectives on advisory boards alongside stat boards, and how can those work together well, and I guess address some of these topics around trusted advisor relationships, etc.
You'd like to provide some comment on trusted advisor?
Well, I can comment on advisory board. So, Rob, good to see you, mate.
To see you,
which capacity are you here in? Is it beer love? Which one is it?
It's all about form today.
Right.
But I'm next to a beer love customer, so that's good too.
Right, good. For me, it's at the time of the evolution of your business. So I had an advisory board early on when I didn't have executives in my team that were, really strong leaders. So I had somebody who, well, not strong leaders, domain, experts, right? So I didn't have anybody who was really strong in product to start with, anybody who was really strong in the sort of whole digital advertising thing. So having them as, complementary to my board, which was, I gave that context earlier, which was, founder-orientated board, was very valuable because I could draw on expertise into what I'm doing in the company from the advisors. Once the board got to the board that I've now got, and I got the executive team in, the advisory board became surplus to requirements. So I'd say early on in your evolution, Rob, even if you've got a board, having people that maybe really know your industry well, or you've got a gap in your team, it could be finance, I don't know, then I do think there's a role for advisory board.
Thanks, David. Thanks, Robert. And we've got time perhaps for one or two last questions if anyone else has got a question that they'd like to ask. And if you don't hear from anyone shortly, Susie, you can step in. Looks like it's you, Susie.
Uh-oh. Okay, it's me again. Fantastic. I'm curious to understand it, and I think, Damien, you alluded to this, but the business I'm working in is a business based in Australia, but most of our workforce is based offshore. So there's a big cross-cultural requirement in terms of understanding building strategy and being able to articulate that in a way that captures everybody's sense of engagement and excitement. So I'm just curious if anyone had that experience or worked with a lot of offshore staff that makes it a different type of engagement requirement.
Yeah, look, I can share some experiences just in my current environment and previous sort of roles I've played. Look, one of the big ones I've got right now, I have an Australian and New Zealand operation, but culturally, we're Australian dominated. It doesn't help also that our corporate colours are green and gold. So when all the comms goes out to New Zealand, it's going to sound like a funny thing, but it's really annoying to my New Zealand team and particularly to my New Zealand customers, because I think that's because they're Australian. So it's at a very small level, just that acknowledging that there are different cultural perspectives and particularly in New Zealand right now, the use of te reo, language, Maori language in execution is gaining a lot of momentum. And so, we do some basic stuff. It all looks and sounds Australian. And I know we think we're sort of very, very similar, but that not acknowledging deeply enough that there are different cultural requirements at an enterprise level, I think is a fundamentally important thing, and not to make assumptions about similarity or differences, but really to explore what they are. In a previous life, I've done a lot of work around Asia, and and probably many here have had the same experience, but each country brings a very, very specific and very different culture, and there's a lot of variability across the cultures, and that extends to the way that structures work. It extends to the way that culture works. It very much extends to the way that decision making works. And I have found that unless you spend the time, firstly, to jettison your own assumptions and your own culture and your own constructs like those, and don't actively seek to understand those other cultures, you'll be struggling the whole way along. So it takes a bit of effort. And the first thing I say is stop making assumptions, and question the assumptions you're making that other people are making, because it will get in the way of either the rate of cadence or the comfort of your progress through whatever that execution is.
Thanks, Damien. Now we're just going to wrap up. We're 1 minute before the hour, and we always want to make sure that we're running a tight ship here at Lighthouse. So I just want to pass on our thanks to each of the panellists. Fantastic insights that you shared with us today. Great diversity in terms of the way in which you offered your feedback and shared your insights. And I think for any of us that are here live or have the opportunity to be able to work through the recording, there's going to be some real value unlocked for everyone who's part of who's been part of the program. We would like to wish you all the best with your leadership journey. We thank you very much for providing the time to be able to come into the event, and we wish you the best for the rest of today and the rest of the week. And we will circulate some responses to the questions. There was about 6 or 8 questions in the chat, so we'll circulate that to everyone who attended. You have the opportunity to be able to pick up a copy, and feel free to reach out to any of us, Peter, myself, Eric, or any of the Lighthouse team, and we'll be very happy to provide any particular insights that you might want to share with any of the panel members. Thanks very much for coming along today, and we wish you all the best.